ready to build resiliency, create a healthy lifestyle, and overcome adversity with a warrior mindset. This is Define the Fight with Mariah Prussia.
Hey, welcome back to Define the Fight on this warm Monday morning, and bear with the voice. Sometimes we have that operator smoke 20 packs of cigarettes kind of voice, and we just literally roll with the punches. So as we roll with the punches this morning, our special guest, Mark Schulman, right now is slightly delayed. And so you know what we do? We just keep moving forward. And Mark is an amazing man that I met roughly 4 years ago when Pink was in town. And he has been literally a longtime drummer for multiple stars. He has spent the last 14 years as Pink's drummer. He's also worked with Billy Idol, Stevie Nicks, Foreigner, Sheryl Crow, Cher, just to name a few. And transitioning from being a drummer, he then went into the life of being a full-time corporate speaker. And now he travels, he speaks, and he's about ready to release his second book on the power of attitude called The Attitude Equation, which is going to be available soon for pre-release on Amazon. So as we wait for Mark to log in here, the key thing to understand that is in life, it's all about attitude. Where are you currently at, and where do you want to be? So what are some of those tips? Well, it's all about putting your first foot forward, and how do you lead into your morning? What is that AM ritual? I know for myself, I went through a variety of different trainings and transitions where I committed to a full year of really diving headfirst into the trenches. I went into Navy SEAL training, which we will lead into next week with an amazing guest who is a retired Navy SEAL. But we focused on breath work, really defining on how we wanted to show up in our level of commitment and all of those different components it takes to really be your best self. During those crucibles, I had probably roughly five different crucibles that I did in California, from a 5-hour to a 12-hour. Diving into that 12-hour first crucible was really mind-boggling. It required a level of commitment physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. So when you get there, I went to California, and it was literally in the mountains. It was 30 degrees. It was cold. It was windy, and I was the only female out of 30 men that were lining up to do this 12-hour crucible to really push through and to persevere. And as I looked to my left and as I looked to my right, we had great conversations, but at that moment, I was able to look to see who was going to be able to withstand the 12 hours and who was going to fold. We got on our backpacks of 40 pounds, getting ready to ruck, and we ran 2 miles literally to get warmed up. And as we got to where we were starting boot camp, all 30 of us were in formation, side by side, looking at each other, not really knowing what kind of push and words that were going to be thrown at us. And at that point, we were getting hosed down with water. Yes, we were getting swore at. We were doing anything from burpees for X amount of minutes to, you name it, bear crawling, diving headfirst in and out of iced water, to repeating. And as we looked at each other, we knew that this was literally going to be one heck of a ride. And at halfway through, we did the Murph. We did literally carrying somebody on a stretcher up and down the mountain, learning how to protect ourselves from the left, viewing our horizon to the right. And one of the Navy SEALs said this: if you are feeling pain, you need to get out of yourself. Because every single person right now that is with you is feeling the same pain. And this is about a team effort in making sure that every single person perseveres. And that's really how mindset really comes into play, is you have to be willing to step over that edge, not just stick your foot in the water, but really submerge yourself into what you want to do in life. And my guest, who I see now in full color, full of energy and zest, is back with us. Mark Schulman, I already announced you, man. I've got, like I said, the operator voice, but I am so excited to see your smile and have your energy on Define the Fight this morning.
It's so great to see you, Mariah. I'm so sorry. I had a lot of trouble just logging in for some reason. It happens sometimes. But I'm
Hey,
here.
you
Full
are
force,
here.
ready to rock.
Woo! Happy Monday, Mark. We, you
Happy
know,
Monday to you. How are you?
I'm living the dream and surviving the voice. So I'm like, yes, I'm like, please, baby Jesus, let Mark come back into the studio because I was like, I want to hear your story and really just share everything that you've done in life because man, you've literally lived the rock star dream.
I feel so grateful. And I've worked with some of the most amazing artists that I have learned so much for. I relentlessly studied their success. That's been one of my mandates is to transition from being a road musician for 32 years to now a full-blown corporate keynote speaker presenting what I call a rock show disguised as a keynote is for me, it's my platform to be able to give back after everything I've gotten to do and everything I've gotten to learn from being involved with these amazing people.
And to transition from one stage to the next. So clearly your voice wasn't necessarily heard as a drummer, but your beat was. And now you're switching your beat to lead with your voice. How was that transition from one stage to the other?
Well, a stage is a stage. I mean, Shakespeare said life is a stage and all the men and women are merely performers. So the way that I see it is I've clocked my 30, 40,000 hours being on stage all my life. And so being able to transition was a fairly easy evolution for me. Also, I got to give my folks some credit because I grew up with two college professors. So I got a bit of the teaching gene and I always taught drums. And my mother actually ran a tutorial center and gave me my own class to teach of English as second language students because I was a grammar and composition tutor. So that was my first taste. And then I started doing drum clinics, music clinics, did 1,000 drum clinics. And after a while, I realized, this is such a small microcosm of people. I'm entertaining and I'm educating all of these folks. I said, well, what if we expand it? And a friend of mine who has just recently passed, Dom Famularo, who we call the ambassador of drumming, one of the most motivating men on the planet, he had talked about how he had gotten an opportunity to do a corporate gig and it always stuck in the back of my head. I thought, I could do that. I could take the same format. I could learn more about the collegiate and corporate markets, learn more about what people need, how I can truly be of service, how I can truly provide information that's going to inspire and motivate and educate and entertain them. And that's what I did. I just learned and learned and learned and started doing smaller corporate gigs and collegiate gigs and just built it up and built it up and built it up to the point where after touring with Pink for 14 years and after being on the road for 32 years, I thought, I think I've worn that out. I think I've got more to say. I think I've got a greater purpose. I talk about in my speech shifting passion to purpose because passion is how we play it. Passion is what drives it. It's the motivator, it's the activator, it's the generator. But passion is fleeting. So if you really want to have this meaningful life, then you transcend passion into purpose. And I found this to be my new sense of purpose. Whereas all my life, my purpose was to play drums and to get on stage and to play for as many people as I could and inspire them that way. And then you realize, okay, it's time to evolve. So I worked my butt off. I studied with two speaking coaches, an acting coach, a director, a storyteller, and I moved into this new format and this platform, and I'm just having a ball. It's like I'm having just as much fun, if not more fun, than when I was on the stage the last few years. So it's just a different stage. It's just transforming one bit of what you do and evolving it into something else. It's like, look at you. I mean, you're doing this podcast now and you have such a voice in this world. And for me, it was like, okay, it's my turn to have a voice in that world.
I love how you spoke about the fact of you wanted to be able to reach more people. And we can keep ourselves in like a fishbowl and just, reach one at a time. But right now, the world needs so much more. And it's about reaching, and it's not about creating change. It's about leaving impact because we can't force people to change. We can impact them enough to want to create that change. So let's talk about some of those experiences that you care to share, Mark.
Well, I was very myopic. All I wanted to do was play drums. Drums chose me. I was born a drummer. When I was 5 years old, I sat down at a set of drums I could just play. That was my calling. That was my calling, just to be the musician, to be the drummer, to be the band leader, to learn how to communicate inside, in that particular context. So that's what I saw, and that's what I created. My folks are both professors, as I mentioned earlier. I went to college for a couple of years. I quit to play music. I'm like, I got to play music. This is all I'm going to do. And so I expanded on that. Then I finally got my first road gig in the 80s when I was 26 years old with Brenda Russell, this R&B artist. And then I just built it up from there. And I got one gig after another, after another, after another. And I was so fortunate because I was always gutsy and willing to communicate. I just saw everything as an opportunity. And my philosophy was, somebody's got to get the gig. It might as well be me, because I did the work. I had an immense failure with this first big audition that I had. I auditioned for a band called Bad English, which was the guys from Journey and John Waite. And I was slotted in. I was really highly recommended. And I thought, man, this is going to be my first big gig. I went in. I was so overwhelmed with nervousness that I rushed horribly, to the point where the musical director, John Kane, just took the metronome, which is the timekeeping device, threw it at me and said, watch the light, man. You're rushing horribly. And then I just lost it. I'm trying to watch the light, and I'm trying to look up, and I'm trying to just do everything I can do. And I knew I just butchered that gig. I thought I was ready. I wasn't ready. I went home. I literally crawled in bed, pulled the covers over my head. And I thought, you know what? That's it. I can't do this. I'm done. I was so devastated. Then I just stopped and had this epiphany, like, what the heck am I thinking? Threw the covers off my head. And that was the moment I decided that no one's ever going to tell me I'm speeding up or slowing down unless I want to speed up or slow down. And I made a decision that I'm going to just perfect my inner tempo, my inner time, which is critical, not only for drummers, the metaphor for everybody, understanding our internal tempo, understanding our pace, and being organic with our pace. It's a great metaphor. So I spent 2 years working my butt off, just creating the best internal sense of tempo I could. And then when I just started auditioning for gigs, and I was getting gigs, and I realized that I'd really mastered this. And since then, nobody's ever told me that I'm speeding up or slowing down unless I wanted to speed up or slow down. So that was my first big lesson.
Well, and what I love about that is the fact that you said, okay, I totally dropped the ball on that. But you could have given up. And musicians, they have a hard time, actors, actresses, so on and so forth. It's not like all of a sudden, boom, you get this. You have some people that are lucky that just happen to get that call and they land it. But at the same point, it typically isn't. It doesn't roll like that. It's usually you have to get gravel on the backside, you stand back up, you pick it out, and then you choose to move forward or you choose to stay still. And you were proactive in your approach, saying, hey, I'm taking these covers down. I'm not going to be that victim of those circumstances. I'm going to rise to the occasion. And that's exactly what you did. So kudos to you, Mark, because clearly you took that one piece of more experiences to come and said, not me, not today.
Well, we're either the victim or the victor. And we're all presented with these challenges every day in our lives, when we're presented with something that we are either going to succeed or we're going to fail at. And we're constantly tested. We're constantly up against this chance to either overcome and to, be persistent and prevail and figure out a way, get creative. I mean, one of the aspects of being creative is you're literally making something from nothing. So when you're up against challenges, you create ways to sort of surmount these challenges. And, for me, it was like, okay, what do I need to do? I need to perfect my tempo. I need to perfect my meter. So I found the perfect course to be able to do that. And I used to demonstrate it to corporate audiences. I used to take them through some of the exercises that I did that were improving my time, my tempo, my meter. And then we would do exercises about how to align these teams and these groups so they would be in rhythm, in sync with each other. Because it's so critical for any band, any group, any organization, any team to really read each other's rhythms and to pay attention not only to who we are and what our internal tempo is, but to pay attention to each other. Pay attention to your clients because timing is everything. We know that in business, we know that in music, we know that in life. So that metaphor of timing and being the drummer, being the one that literally is responsible for keeping the beat for everybody on that stage, it's critical. So one of the things I talk about in my program is the importance of engagement. Engagement is your superpower because when you're truly engaged, you're truly mindful, you're truly present, and you're responding in the moment as opposed to reacting. And we've been living in such reactive times, and it's really critical just to be able to notice, am I reacting? Am I responding? Because when you're responding, you're inventive, you're creative. You can do what musicians love to do so much, which is improvise, which means you're acting in the moment, like I'm doing right now. I didn't know what I was going to say today, but I get to improvise. I get to be present. I get to respond, whatever comes to my head. And then I get to produce and I get to provide service for others and information for others that, as you say, is going to impact them. That's why I call myself an activational speaker, not a motivational speaker.
Well, and I can tell you one thing, you definitely activate people, and the fact that you move. So I can just about imagine you on the stage and how you do draw that attention and you engage. Now, you spoke about the fact of being creative. For you speaking on the stage, do you have a script or you have that small template and then you free fall off of it? You know what I'm saying? Because when I speak on the stage, I have my ideas, the direction I want to go, but then I'll also read the energy of the room, and then I will shift gears so that I'm, engaging those other individuals. We're using more of the intuition to draw that engagement.
Well, I have a script because I look at what I do as a one-man show. I call it a rock show disguised as a keynote. So I do have a basic script and a basic format. And then what's fun for me is doing what you were talking about. Then I improvise off of that depending upon the audience and the move and their mood. And so I'm constantly reading them. And then I also customize an entire portion. I'll actually create a whole monologue for if I'm speaking to a sales team, I'm speaking to an IT team, based on the conversations that I have with the C-suite, with a meeting planner about their individual needs and wants, pains, challenges, so that I can truly be of service. The one thing I realized is everything I do in my life now, I look at as an opportunity to be of service. And I realized getting on stage playing drums is being of service to the audience, being of service to the band, being of service of Pink. Getting on stage to speak, I get to be of service with my verbal communication, but I'm also playing drums. So that's why it's a rock show disguised as a keynote. I'm presenting this kinetic experience. I play a Pink medley, a Foreigner medley, a Cher medley, a Billy Idol medley. And then I use these artists as heroes and as examples of top performers that I can talk about as it relates to, in my instance, I talk about the power of attitude. My next book is coming out. It's called The Attitude Equation. Because everybody that I interviewed, like I interviewed you for my last book, I took the interviews a step further. I interviewed Judd Apatow, Howie Mandel, Martina Navratilova, Grant Cardone, about their experience and what they believe the power of attitude is. And every single person said the same thing, that attitude is responsible for their successes and their failures. That is the foundation. So I talk about the power of attitude, and I demonstrate it with some examples of what these artists have done. And then I take people called attitude shifts to show everybody how you can create an immediate attitude shift. And I talk about some very specific attitudes.
In current times, I can tell you one thing for free, is your attitude is everything. And Mark Schulman's going to dive into his book, The Attitude Equation, and what he brings to the table and how you can shift your attitude towards greatness, positivity, and dig yourself out of a potential hole that you might be sitting in. So Mark, you know what? Bring on the heat, bring on the attitude, and let's drop that equation.
Oh, let's bring it on. Well, first of all, I have a co-writer, Dr. Jim Samuels, who's been one of my mentors for many years. Now, this formula is one that he created, and it's one that I now practice. I practiced it for years and years and years. It changed my life. And then I made it the foundation of my speech. And the book is finally coming out as something we worked on together. And it was my idea to interview all of these top performers about their experience with attitude. So here is the formula. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm taking notes, man.
Okay. So much of the time, we cannot control what happens to us. As we can tell by what has happened over the past few years, there have been so many things out of our control. But at any point in time, I'm talking about right now, you have the power to change, control, or shift your attitude about what is happening to you. And all that takes is a desire and taking the action to choose an attitude that serves you. And I know that sounds very simple, but when you choose an attitude that serves you, you're making a decision to choose that attitude. Making a decision is another superpower, because when you make a decision, you're cutting off all other possibilities and you're making an agreement with yourself. That's the greatest agreement you can make. Here's where it gets really fantastic. Because your attitude is your point of view. It's where you're looking from. It's your vantage point or your disadvantage point, depending upon the attitude that you choose. Because it's not what we look at, it's what we see and perceive that determines our reality, that determines our experience, the way you perceive yourself, the lens through which you see the world, the meaning that you attach to people, places, and circumstances. And these are all determined by the story that you tell yourself. And we're constantly telling ourselves stories. And the stories are determined by the attitude that you have the power to choose or shift. But it gets better. Because your attitude is what drives your behavior. If you're not taking notes, maybe you should. Think about that. Think about the power and the impact of that. Because one attitude can drive many behaviors. And your behavior is what determines the consequences of your life. So by shifting your attitude, you're literally changing the outcomes of your life. So the attitude equation is A times B equals C. Attitude times behavior equals consequence. And I've used this for the last 25 years of my life, and I equate my success to my ability to understand the power of what I can do with my attitude at any moment in time. It's my choice.
So when you go into corporations and you speak, do you do individual meetings, or do you do any coaching with individuals that might be entrepreneurs when you're looking at that to help shift the attitude, right? Because we all have choices, but sometimes people may feel like they're in a certain spot where they don't see their attitude as negative. And they're a leader, but then are they leading in the appropriate manner? So it's taking that scope and really going deeper on owning how they're showing up. And sometimes people think that they are showing up, and that could show up as a micromanager. That could show up as, a really awesome, positive leader. There's just so many different variables there on helping individuals create an open mindset to understand what their attitude truly is. How do you dive into those pieces or peel back that armor?
Well, generally speaking, I speak to crowds. I speak to the entire conference. I do individual coaching as well with executives. And I have a lot of conversations now with the executives with whom I've worked. And I think the idea is look at the consequence, because the attitude creates the behavior, which creates the consequence. And remember, it's not, your attitude affects everybody else. So although you call it your attitude, if you're a leader, as an example, you want to look at the consequences of how what the consequences that your attitude is producing for your people, and is not only producing in terms of profits and and pleasing the shareholders. It's how how much value are you truly creating for the people? And I just spoke for MHA, a very big corporation. David Holliday is a CEO, and we did a fireside chat on the stage. But when we were having our 2-hour conversation where we really bonded, he really surprised me, because I said, what do you think are the most foundationally important components of who you are and who you can be as a leader for others? What he told me was vulnerability and compassion. I've never heard a leader say vulnerability is the top priority to who they are. And I realized that when he said that he's vulnerable, that means that he is open to being right. He's open to being wrong. He's open to taking and using all the power of everybody with whom he works to integrate into this superpower as a company and as a corporation. So he was smart enough to realize that rather than being a megalomaniac or a control freak, he thought, well, he realized at some point, the more vulnerable he can be, then the more compassionate he can be, then the more he can actually absorb the information and utilize all the great superpower of the team, of the organization. So it really is every individual's sort of job and responsibility to look at the outcome of their attitudes to see how effective they are. It's pretty simple. If you realize, if you're accomplishing what you want to accomplish, and you're really intuitively feeling fantastic about the outcomes, about the consequences, then you're selecting the proper attitudes. If you're not, and you know intuitively, and if you've made that agreement with yourself and you're being honest with yourself as opposed to kidding yourself, you realize, wait a minute, I need an attitude shift. I'm going to explore other attitudes that are going to drive different behaviors that are then going to produce different consequences, not only for me, but for everybody else.
And I think a key indicator too is when you start looking at what is your attitude like, look at your friends. Look at your friends.
Yeah.
Who do you surround yourself with? Now, if you're hanging out with Debbie Downers, you probably have more of a downer attitude as well, because you're fitting in with that circle. You know, and millionaires say, you know, if you want to become a millionaire, then why are you hanging out with people who are broke? Right? Because there's different frequencies. So I'm not saying that don't hang out with individuals that financially from a certain perspective, but hang out with people who are activating goals, who are committed to goals, who want to achieve. But when you had mentioned vulnerability, that is huge, because that shows that he was not living out of his ego. Right? So you've got individuals who are in the I sphere, and then you have people that live in the we sphere. And clearly he's in the we sphere, where it's like, I want our team, not my team. I want our team to be successful in how we lead, how we show up, and what we bring within the organization, because then it starts filtering out to other people. And then they see that, they feel that energy, and they see that everybody's happy where they work. And now you start drawing like the law of attraction. You're attracting like-minded individuals who want to elevate in that industry, which is great. So kudos to him for saying, hey, man, I'm vulnerable. And I think more people need to start leaning into that and saying, you know what, maybe I need to open up a little bit here and really show who I am, because the reality is all of us have stories. Every single one of us has stories. However, not many people really let people in to hear it. You know, it's really what it comes down to. So, I mean, your story clearly, with your many miles in countries and states and cities of traveling, whether it's speaking or drumming, there's clearly some vulnerable states that you probably were in during those times. And how open were you, Mark, to share some of those with people?
Well, I've considered myself a man who allows himself to be vulnerable, who allows himself to express his emotions. I've even called myself a crybaby sometimes because I'm so willing to allow my emotions to come out. My daughter, who's just turning 14, she laughs at me. We watch movies together. She's looking at me going, "Oh yeah, dad's crying again," because vulnerability and allowing your emotions, we're all emotional beings. And what drives us, what motivates us, what inspires us to want to buy a product, as an example, is generally something that emotionally moves us toward that. And I think what David realized that is smart is if he's vulnerable and he's emotional, he becomes more compassionate. And then very simply, the people produce more because people start to realize that he's creating a safe space where they are allowed to communicate. Because if he's being vulnerable, he's setting up a space where they're allowed to be vulnerable, where they're allowed to go for it and make mistakes and be honest. And instead of living in fear, they are empowered by their own emotions. They're empowered by their CEO, who's an incredible role model. So in the end, he's really being smart. And it's a great, if you want to look at it from a business strategy, it just comes down to being a fantastic business strategy as opposed to being a megalomaniac that just wants to control. Because unfortunately, I've met so many CEOs and so many people in positions of power, that is their approach. And that's why I was so blown away when the first thing he said was vulnerability.
Well, and it's great to see mentors and true individuals that connect, that recognize that, hey, if you want something in life, lead from a heart-centered space and it will come into fruition. I have a question or two that I want to ask you, and I'm just going to roll with the first one. Is with all of the different performers that you've worked with, I'm just going to knock out one, okay? What is one thing that you learned from Pink's perseverance to really show up and stand out amongst all of the many phenomenal musicians?
Pink is so committed to her audience that there was one night, it's a bit of a long story, but she does what we call the 360, where she gets up in this gyro and spins around over the audience. Well, in the early days of doing that, they didn't monitor whether the clips were clipped in. And she raised her hand to cue the computer operator, and the dancer was trying to get the clip in. The clip was turned upside down. The clip was not in. So in the 2 seconds it took him to hit the kill switch, it was one of the most frightening things I'd ever experienced. She was only clipped in on one side. She got yanked off the stage, pulled into what we call the pit, pulled all the way up against the metal side rail. She nearly died.
Wow.
And to make a long story short, she didn't. And I thought she had broken her leg. And her husband dove into the pit along with all the other techs. She had her husband drag her back to the stage because she wanted to get onto the stage. This was the last song. Her concern, above and beyond her own well-being, she got onto the stage. She had her husband. She was leaning on his shoulder because it looked like she had broken her leg. You know what she did? She apologized to the audience. She said, "Listen, everybody, I'm so sorry, but I think I'm too injured to perform the last song. But listen, I'm willing to give everybody their money back." Wow. And by that point, they brought a stretcher on the stage, took her off, and took her to the hospital. That level of commitment is profound. But that is who she is when it comes to her audience. Because I've worked with so many world-class artists. She lies down on the stage. She signs, arms and necks and legs, and she'll sign everything she can. And she runs into the audience. I mean, there are probably 100,000 Pink tattoos of her name because that's what a lot of people were doing. She would sign their arms and then they'd go get tattoos.
Oh, that's
It's all
unbelievable.
about how committed are you to your customers, to your client, to your audience. And her level of commitment was so inspiring to all of us. That's one of the segments I created in my presentation, is that every single note I play matters. And if I attach a sense to every note, every word, every thought, every action, then that is my why. People talk about the importance of your why. So every single time I get on that stage, whether I'm speaking or whether I'm playing, every single word matters. Every inflection matters. Every pause matters. When I'm playing drums, every note matters. I take every single note, every nuance so seriously, because that's what the world-class people do. Those are the people that I learned from, is how committed they are to the craft. And it doesn't matter. I went to Japan and I went to a donut shop. I don't eat donuts anymore, but back then I did, 2007.
I'm glad you don't,
The
Mark.
gentleman served me a donut with both hands, looked me in the eyes, took so much pride in serving the donut. You can take so much pride and you can act like a rock star. I talk about the rock star DNA is how you approach it. Your why. What are you doing? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it? It doesn't matter whether you're on a stage. That's your stage. Your stage might be your desk. Your stage might be speaking to your team. But when you're on that stage, every single word, every thought, every action, every note matters. And if you treat it all like it matters, you have so much more fun. It stimulates the endorphins in your brain, and everybody understands around you, this person really means it, and they are phenomenal. And that's what I learned with working with these world-class artists.
I love it. Is that level of commitment and living in the moment and recognizing that you're blessed. So act blessed, be blessed, and then share those blessings to other individuals, because right now the world needs hope. They need a light that's lit underneath them, and the best way to do it is to let that light of yours resonate. And like you said, you wanted to reach more people. And now you're going to reach more people, not only through your keynote speaking, but through your book. We just have a minute or two here left, Mark. Let's touch base on where your book is at and how individuals can also read that, purchase, and support you and your mission.
Well, it's called The Attitude Equation. It's on Amazon, ready for pre-release. It gets released April 23rd. And that's where you can pick it up. That's where you can read it. I'm going to be doing an audiobook version where I actually had to audition myself, but I'm going to do the audiobook dictation myself. And if you want to know more about me, go to www.markschulman.com, MarkSchulman.com. We're constantly updating information. And that's it. Contact me through Mariah, because Mariah's my buddy. You can always find out through her. And I want to hear more about what you're doing, but that's a whole other conversation. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. And I am just blessed to have you on the show, Mark. It's all about the energies. I keep speaking about energy and frequency, and you have that. And I appreciate you and being a friend and coming on the show today. So again, you guys, if you are looking for an amazing individual who holds a light high, not just for himself, but for others, check out markschulman.com, his new book that's coming out. And then next week, we have a retired Navy SEAL, Jason Gardner, who is coming on to share his story. And together, you guys, it is really, literally all about defining the fight, because you know what? Until you define it, how do you expect to win the fight? So, Mark, thank you for coming on, defining your fight, and sharing your light with the world today.
Oh, thank you, Mariah. What you're doing is so awesome. You are awesome. And anything I can do for you, you let me know.
You got it. And tell your wife and your daughter hi, please.
I will. Well, I've had a change in my life.
Okay.
But,
okay.
That's another story. Anyway.
Well, give your daughter some hugs. Give your daughter some hugs.
I will give my daughter some hugs, and I'll give my girlfriend Heather Kreider, who speaks with me. She's a neuro coach, and she is brilliant. We to actually do a speech together, and she runs my business. So
Hey, well then
thank you
give her
so much.
give her a hug.
Mwah.
All right, you take
I
care.
will.
Thank you for joining us on Define the Fight. Until next week, go out there and get after it. Have a good day.
Cheers.